Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a scary story that is apparently true. It's focusing on the paranormal, and I feel like there is some truth to it. It's just my opinion, but I'm going to go ahead and let you be the judge, and we're about to get into it. But before I do, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe because it really does help me out a lot, and it is always greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's get into today's story. It's not unusual for nurses, medical workers, paramedics to experience paranormal occurrences. In fact, it seems almost typical. Those who have cared for those who are closest to death share a similar story. Patients seeing loved ones, family members, or even pets, appearing only to them and seeming to guide them into the next life. Many attendants who work in nursing homes have several stories to share on this subject, some of which include hauntings, which is what today's story is about. This story comes from a nurse, and we're going to call her Anna. She worked in the dementia ward. There were a few odd experiences, but there's one that she remembers vividly, and it was with an Alzheimer's patient. She'd gone into seizures unexpectedly one night. Writhing and making horrible guttural sounds, they managed to calm her down, but she seemed confused and disoriented for a while. After the seizure, she seemed to experience intense but realistic hallucinations, and they were about her husband who had passed away years ago. So in her disorientation during a hallucination, she reached out her hand like she was reaching for someone, and she started muttering something about her husband, and she was reaching out toward what seemed to be someone that was standing beside one of the nurses. And Anna said that they all assumed that she was just imagining it. So Anna and the other nurses assured her that there was no one else in the room but them. But she insisted that her husband was there with them. And she continued to reach out toward her husband that was standing next to the nurse, but they couldn't see him. There was no one else there. She began speaking to him and asking him where he had been and what he was doing there. She even gestured for him to sit on the bed, and she scooched over as if to make room for him to come and sit down beside her. They were all slightly baffled by her behavior. She'd never exhibited anything like this, and they were chalking it up basically to the seizure. And Anna stood there watching as she made room, and she recalls, even though she'd written it off later on, that was just her imagination, she really thought that she'd saw for a moment a dip created in the bed as if someone had sat down beside this patient. Processing it in her mind further, she just wrote it off as being, overworked and just tired. And after the occurrence, the patient seemed happier than she'd ever seen her, so what was the point in arguing and causing her any further distress? Seemed harmless at the time, so they went ahead and allowed her to think that she was having a conversation with her dead husband. Now, Anna had gone back several times in the evening to check on her, and she continued to have these conversations and pause as if waiting for a response in any normal conversation to an empty room. But she, again, seemed happy and content, so Anna would go on about her rounds and continue to check back. On the last of the rounds of her evening, Anna went to check on this patient and found her with a forlorn look on her face. And when she stepped into the room to talk to her, she felt as if it was somehow emptier than it had been before, but she didn't really know why. She asked the patient what was wrong, and she turned to Anna and said that he'd left. She was so very sad and that she'd hoped that he would come back. Anna went ahead and assured her that he would, and then she helped her settle down into bed to get some rest. She left the room and was about to return to the nurse's station when a call light came on from a room across the way. So she hurried over to the patient's room and went inside, and the first thing that she noticed was how cold it was in the room. She thought that maybe a window had been left open and that was the cause of the room feeling so chilly, but when she looked around, she realized that none of the windows were open. Anna turned toward the patient, and she was staring wide-eyed at the wall beside her bed. She had pulled the sheets up under her chin as if to shield herself from some unforeseen assailant. Anna had asked her if she needed medical assistance, but she shook her head, stating that this man wouldn't leave her room. "I told him to go, but he won't leave. He's just standing there." By this time, another nurse had joined Anna in the room. They both looked at each other and then at the empty wall, and Anna asked, "What man?" The patient pointed and said, "Him, right there." Anna said, "Can you ask who he is?" And the patient said, "Okay, I'll go ahead and ask." So she repeated the question to the wall, asking, "Who are you?" And then she frowned at the wall and then looked over to the nurses and said, "He says his name is Roscoe." Anna felt like her blood went cold. She felt shivers and her stomach just dropped. She was floored because when they were helping the patient in the room across the way, and she was saying that she was speaking with her husband, she said that his name was Roscoe. Now she stood there for a moment wondering, had this patient heard? Had she been able to overhear them talking about what was going on? Is that how she knew that they were discussing the patient's husband, his name being Roscoe? But she was too far away and her door was closed, and they'd been speaking in a way that was rather quiet. She just didn't believe that there was any way for this patient to have overheard them saying the name Roscoe. But even though she was floored by what the patient was saying, she still had to do her job, so she steeled herself and put those feelings aside and continued to play along with the patient, not letting her know that anything was, wrong, that there was anything that, was troubling her in that moment. And she said to the wall, "Well then, Roscoe, would you mind leaving so that my patient can get some sleep?" And the other nurse gave her a look and kind of like nudged her arm, just giving her basically a quiet hard time, like, "What are you doing? I mean, what's happening here? Why are you placating her?" Anna realized that sometimes with patients dealing with Alzheimer's, that sometimes you have to play along so that you can soothe them, so that they're not terrified. It's more helpful than harmful. So she really figured that it was just okay, to go ahead and keep the patient calm and play along was just really the best plan of action. And after Anna had said that, the patient who sat in the bed seemed to follow along with her eyes as if she was watching someone walk out of the room. Anna thought for a moment that she'd felt something like a breeze kind of go by her swiftly, almost having her sway just a little bit as if to get out of some unforeseen person's way who was exiting the room. Again, she felt that she was overly tired. She'd already been through a lot with the patient previously, having a seizure and getting her calm and cared for. Although it was strange that the patient had said Roscoe, she was still trying to process all this stuff and just really chalking it up to her own imagination, her own tiredness, and again, like before, she just wrote it off as if it were nothing. So after that, the patient was calm and Anna went ahead and went on with her shift, and things continued on pretty much as normal. But that wasn't the last that Anna heard of Roscoe. It was one afternoon a little time later that Anna was on her rounds. Everything seemed quiet and she was walking toward the nurse's station when something made her pause. She remembered shuddering a little bit and then backing up a few steps as she peered into the door of her Alzheimer's patient's room. She was standing in the middle of the room with her arms held up as though they were wrapped around someone's shoulders, and she was swaying gently. It took Anna a moment to realize that she was dancing. It wasn't that had startled Anna, it was that when she was first walking by, she could have sworn that she had caught the glimpse of a man that was in there dancing with her Alzheimer's patient, and he was looking at her and smiling. When she paused and stepped back to look inside the room and realized that her patient was dancing alone, the whole experience put her on edge for the rest of the day. And every time Anna walked by that room, she half expected to see that man standing in there looking at her, smiling. But of course she didn't, and the day went on as if, nothing had ever happened. And again, she did her best to go ahead and write it off. It was later on that evening when Anna was doing the last of her rounds, she went in to check on her patient, and she was asleep, but it seemed as though her breathing was a little off, and she wanted to make sure that everything was okay, so she put on her stethoscope and approached the patient and leaned in to whisper that everything's okay, that she was the nurse just checking on her so that if she did wake up, she wouldn't feel as startled knowing that Anna had already given her, the slight nudge and whisper letting her know that she was just checking to make sure she was all right. So she's listening to the breathing, the stethoscope, and then she realizes that everything is fine, that, everything is basically normal. And as she's getting ready to stand back up, she realizes that the room has taken on a different feel, that there's a heaviness in the room, as if there's almost like a crushing presence that's kind of surrounding her, like she's being squeezed by something like a vice grip and she's having trouble breathing. So she tries to straighten up as best she can, but she feels this immense pressure on her. Even though it was just her and her patient in the room, she would swear there was someone else in the room with them that she wasn't able to see. So even in that moment of just complete terror and muscles starting to tighten up and realizing that something just isn't right in this room, she tries to steady herself and remind herself that she's just checking vitals and everything is fine and there's nothing strange going on, just trying to grasp at whatever logic that she can in the moment to finish what she needs to do so she can get out of the room, basically. And then in that moment when she's really trying to calm herself down, she hears the faint whisper in her ear. It's a man's voice. It's saying, "Nurse." Anna stood still as a statue, not wanting to turn around. But it didn't take long for fear to take over and a surge of energy to overwhelm her to where she just grabbed her things and got out of that room as quickly as she possibly could. After Anna exited the room and had time to calm down, she wondered if she'd actually heard the voice of her patient's dead husband whispering in her ear, or if she'd just gotten caught up in all the strangeness that had occurred around this patient and the one across the way who'd claimed to have this person named Roscoe standing in the room with her. And, she really did her best to try to rationalize it and not really wanting to believe that she may have actually come in contact with this person's late husband, that she'd actually heard the voice of a ghost. And even to this day, Anna's still not sure. There are many stories out there from people who work as first responders, whether it's in hospitals, nursing homes, hospice, any kind of medical care, that have come across occurrences where people have said that they've seen family members, loved ones, pets coming to comfort them before they leave this life. They felt rooms grow cold, grow still, heavy, and have experienced what they consider to be paranormal. Some have even stated that they've seen people who have passed on walking in the hall moments later of the hospitals where they've just seen them leave this life. Do I think that this story is true? And the answer is yes, I do. I do believe that there is something beyond this life. Now, I have my faith that is my own, and we all have our beliefs, and they're not all the same. But I do think that there is something beyond this, and I believe that it is good. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were loved ones there to guide us into the next life, to bring us comfort as we pass on so that we're not afraid. Really doesn't shock me at all. So that is the end of today's story. Let me know what you think in the comments. I look forward to talking to you about it. And yeah, thank you so much for sticking around and watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, stay alert.